He never commanded tanks. He never marched at the front. He never fired a weapon in battle. And yet, no man inside Nazi Germany controlled what people believed more completely than Joseph Goebbels. He did not conquer land. He conquered meaning. He did not silence truth. He replaced it. He did not terrorize the population. He educated it slowly, carefully, relentlessly, until terror felt reasonable. This is not the story of brute force. This is the story of spiritual domination. This is the story of how words became weapons, how morality became flexible, and how an entire society learned to lie to itself without realizing it. This is the dark truth of Joseph Goebbels. If you value deep, thoughtful World War II stories like this, stories that go beyond battles and numbers, consider subscribing. This channel explores the history that shapes how people think. Joseph Goebbels was born in 1897 in Reich, Germany. From the beginning, there was a fracture. His mind was sharp, restless, obsessive, but his body betrayed him. A childhood illness left his right foot permanently deformed. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life, in Imperial Germany, and later in Nazi Germany. The body mattered, strength mattered, uniforms mattered, marching mattered. Goebbels could not march. When World War I arrived, it should have been his moment. Instead, he was rejected from military service, not because he lacked loyalty, not because he lacked patriotism, but because he did not fit the physical image of the nation. That rejection carved something deep inside him. Not rage, resentment, because Goebbels did not want to fight. He wanted to belong. And belonging, once denied, does not disappear. It mutates. Goebbels compensated with intellect. He studied obsessively. Literature, philosophy, history, romanticism. He earned a doctorate. He wrote novels, plays, essays. He believed, truly believed, that recognition would come. It didn't. Publishers rejected him. Critics ignored him. Audiences did not care. This failure mattered more than the limp, because the limp rejected his body, but this rejected his identity. Goebbels did not conclude that he lacked talent. He concluded that the world was blind, and from that conclusion came something dangerous, the belief that society needed to be corrected. Germany after World War I was humiliated, defeated, economically broken, spiritually lost. Goebbels drifted. He flirted briefly with socialist ideas, not out of conviction, but because they promised relevance. He wanted a movement that would need him. Then he heard Adolf Hitler speak, and something clicked. Not because Hitler was logical, not because Hitler was precise, but because Hitler performed belief. Hitler didn't explain. He evoked. Goebbels understood instantly. This is not politics. This is myth-making. Hitler had instinct. Goebbels had method. Together, they could shape reality. Goebbels did not love Nazism at first. He loved its possibility, the ability to simplify chaos, to turn confusion into certainty, to turn resentment into identity. He understood something essential. People do not crave truth. They crave meaning, and meaning does not need accuracy. It needs coherence. Nazism offered coherence. Enemies were named, victims were identified, destiny was promised. Goebbels saw his role clearly. If he could control language, he could control perception, and if he controlled perception, everything else would follow. Goebbels despised the idea that propaganda was crude lying. That was amateur thinking. Propaganda to him was curation. You didn't invent facts. You selected them. You repeated some, buried others, wrapped all of it in emotion. A lie repeated endlessly no longer felt like deception. It felt normal. And normality is more powerful than truth. Goebbels studied crowds like organisms. He understood fatigue, fear, hope, repetition. He knew that most people do not analyze, they absorb. And absorption is where morality dissolves. If you're still watching, you're clearly interested in the deeper side of history, how language, belief, and power shape human behavior. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, Goebbels became Minister of Propaganda. This was not symbolic, it was absolute. He controlled caricature, newspapers, radio, cinema, theater, art, music, publishing, public ceremonies. Nothing reached the population unfiltered. But Goebbels didn't rule by silence, he ruled by flooding. The population wasn't deprived of information. They were drowned in narrative. Soon people didn't feel controlled. They felt aligned. Truth did not vanish. It dissolved. Publicly, Goebbels preached discipline, sacrifice, family values. Privately, he lived without restraint. Affairs, obsessions, constant betrayal. His marriage to Magda Goebbels was a stage prop, the ideal Aryan family. Behind closed doors, it was empty. Goebbels did not see hypocrisy as failure. He saw it as hierarchy. Rules were for belief, not for believers. And slowly, that logic infected the regime itself. Goebbels did not invent anti-Semitism, but he refined its delivery. He understood a terrifying truth. People do not kill humans. They kill symbols. So Jews became abstractions, parasites and diseases and threats. Language did the work first. By the time violence arrived, conscience was already numb. Kristallnacht was not spontaneous, it was preparation paying off. Stories like this are uncomfortable for a reason. If you appreciate history told honestly, not loudly, not simplistically, you're welcome to subscribe. When war began, Goebbels framed it as destiny. Victories were magnified, defeats reframed, losses sanctified. Reality bent under narrative pressure. Even as cities burned, meaning was preserved. Truth became optional. Emotion became law. After Stalingrad, the illusion cracked. Germany was losing. So Goebbels escalated. At the Sportpalast, he asked, "Do you want total war?" The crowd screamed yes. This was not persuasion. It was ritual. Despair converted into obedience. If this moment made you pause, that's intentional. This channel isn't about shock. It's about understanding how power really works. Privately, Goebbels knew the war was lost. The lies were collapsing, but he did not retreat. He doubled down. Truth no longer mattered. Only loyalty. In April 1945, Goebbels entered the bunker. He could have fled. He didn't. When Hitler died, Goebbels became chancellor for one day. Then came the final act. He and Magda poisoned their 6 children. Not out of mercy, out of possession. If the world would not reflect their beliefs, their children would not exist in it. Joseph Goebbels was not a monster. He was educated, articulate, refined. That is what makes him dangerous. He proves something deeply uncomfortable. Evil does not always shout. Sometimes it explains, sometimes it reassures. Sometimes it sounds intelligent. Goebbels did not pull triggers. He made people stop asking questions. And that is how moral decay becomes normal. If you've stayed this far, thank you. If you're interested in the deeper psychology behind World War II, a quiet subscribe goes a long way. By the early 1940s, Joseph Goebbels had achieved something few men in history ever did. He no longer needed to convince the population. They convinced themselves. That was his greatest success and his greatest trap. Because once belief becomes internalized, the architect loses control. Goebbels had trained the German public to interpret reality emotionally, to distrust contradiction, to see doubt as betrayal. But that same mechanism now turned inward. When defeats mounted, people didn't question the system. They questioned themselves. If Germany was losing, it must be because sacrifice wasn't pure enough. If cities burned, it must be because faith wavered. Goebbels watched this with fascination and fear because propaganda no longer needed him. It had become self-sustaining, and self-sustaining belief systems do not tolerate nuance, not even from their creator. Privately, Goebbels was unraveling. His diaries reveal a man constantly oscillating between grandiosity and despair. One day he described himself as indispensable, the next as misunderstood, then betrayed, then triumphant again. This instability wasn't accidental. Goebbels had no inner moral anchor. Truth had been instrumentalized for so long that he no longer experienced it emotionally. Reality to him was malleable. And when reality resists manipulation, the manipulator begins to feel empty. He could no longer retreat into art. Literature no longer soothed him. Music no longer inspired him. Everything had become messaging. Even his own thoughts felt staged. Goebbels' loyalty to Hitler was not ideological. It was existential. Hitler was the proof that Goebbels' worldview worked. As long as Hitler existed, the narrative held. And so Goebbels fused his identity to Hitler completely. He did not simply serve Hitler. He projected himself onto him. Hitler became the living symbol that belief could overpower reality, and as Hitler deteriorated, paranoid, isolated, erratic, Goebbels mirrored the decline. Because if Hitler was wrong, then everything Goebbels had built collapsed with him. By 1944, Goebbels knew Germany would lose. He wrote it privately, he acknowledged it in fragments. But publicly, the messaging intensified. Victory was no longer promised, redemption was. Suffering was reframed as meaning. Death was framed as contribution. This was no longer propaganda for survival. It was propaganda for obliteration. Goebbels was no longer managing morale. He was preparing the population psychologically to accept annihilation without rebellion. That was his final service to the Reich. As Allied forces advanced, Goebbels introduced the idea of the Volkssturm. Children, old men, civilians, armed, mobilized, sacrificed. This was not military logic. It was narrative logic. If the Reich could not win, it would perform loyalty until the end. Goebbels understood something chilling. A total belief system prefers destruction over contradiction. And so he encouraged resistance that had no strategic value, only symbolic value, only death. In April 1945, Goebbels entered the Führer bunker with his family. This was not refuge, it was theater. The bunker was the final stage, where belief and reality would collide. Inside, Goebbels remained animated, writing, planning, issuing statements. Above ground, Berlin collapsed. Below ground, language continued. That alone tells you everything. When Hitler committed suicide on April 30th, 1945, Goebbels became Reich Chancellor. For one day, 24 hours. The title meant nothing. The Reich no longer existed. But for Goebbels, that day mattered. It was confirmation. Confirmation that belief had carried him. As far as possible, there was nowhere left to go. No audience left to convince. Goebbels and his wife Magda made a decision. They would kill their 6 children. This act is often misunderstood. It was not mercy, it was ideology. To Goebbels, his children were not independent moral beings. They were extensions of belief, and a world without Nazism was a world in which they did not belong. This is where spiritual domination reaches its terminal stage, when belief overrides parental instinct, when ideology replaces love. The children were poisoned calmly, systematically, silently. The Reich's final message was written on their bodies. This is difficult history to sit with. If you value stories that don't look away, you're welcome to subscribe. More of these deep dives are coming. After killing his children, Goebbels and Magda took their own lives. This is often framed as loyalty. It was not. It was consistency. Joseph Goebbels had spent his entire life avoiding moral accountability. Suicide was the last escape. Not heroic, not tragic, predictable. Generals lose wars. Propagandists reshape civilizations. Goebbels did not design camps. He did not command executions. He made them acceptable. He transformed cruelty into administration, hatred into normality, violence into logic. And that is why he matters more than many who kill directly. Because systems do not collapse from bullets alone. They collapse when language stops protecting truth. Joseph Goebbels forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous people are not the loudest. They are the ones who explain, who rationalize, and who comfort, who promise meaning. Goebbels did not scream ideology. He normalized it. And normalization is how evil survives. History loves monsters. Monsters are easy to reject. Joseph Goebbels was not a monster. He was intelligent, cultured, persuasive, and that is why he worked, and why his shadow still matters. We tell these stories not to glorify history, but to understand it. If you want to keep exploring how power, belief, and morality collide, consider subscribing. And thank you truly for staying with this story until the end.